Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to the industry program of the MAMI Mumbai Film Festival. Um, it's day one, we've had a fantastic morning, two sessions. Many of you are familiar faces from the morning, so welcome back. And for those of you who've come in the afternoon, welcome. We are here with our community partner, Soho House Mumbai, who've collaborated with the festival to bring you the industry program. I'm Sonia from the year-round program of the festival. So we have a session that I'm very excited to be part of or to listen to this afternoon. So filmmaking, as much as, it's a creative process and, all of that for sure, but there are many, many, many aspects of the legal framework that come into play. And where do you begin as an independent filmmaker, as a producer, or anyone, a cast and crew who works in that? Where do you begin to gain insight and knowledge into, agreements with your potential investors, with your co-producers or producers, distributors, as well as OTT platforms? So, there is so much to learn and so much to know. It can be pretty intimidating and confusing, but help is at hand. so we have with us today Sahana Manjesh. Welcome and thank you so much for yeah. Sahana is a practicing lawyer in Mumbai's courts and works with filmmakers and film technicians on their contracts, both in independent and studio-backed projects. So she's here to take you through a gamut of things, I think, that, yes, over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you to everyone in MAMI who's made this possible, and welcome to everyone. Like Sonia was saying, there's a whole array of different stages at which, as filmmakers, you will be sort of interacting with the law. So what I wanted to do today is to take a little bit of time to go through maybe some of the main stages. This is by no means comprehensive because there are multiple different kinds of contracts, and what I'm saying today is not advice. As all lawyers would say, please take what I'm saying today only as sort of background information. Every film is specific, every contract is specific, so you may need advice specifically, but I just thought it would help us to sort of go through some of these different stages and look out for things that you may be able to negotiate. Again, we all know that in filmmaking, bargaining power is very lopsided, many a time. But even within that power structure, there are some things that maybe you can sort of look out for and sort of negotiate for yourself. So my conversation is going to be split into two halves. First part, I want to talk to you about the things I have encountered in my practice. And second half, I think we'll open it up for Q&A. You can ask me whatever you think is of interest to you. But before I go ahead, this conversation in my mind is meant for filmmakers, film directors, not so much producers, but I'd still like to see, like, by a show of hands, how many of you here are producers? Okay, and how many of you here are film directors, writers? Okay, and technicians? Okay, so I'm going to try and sort of take everybody's interests into consideration, but please understand that my leaning is towards an independent filmmaker, independent technician, so that's where I'm coming from. So I'm going to start from a very basic sort of understanding of what do we do from the stage that there is a story, right? And maybe a lot of what I'm saying is common sense, but in my experience, common sense is not something that's always there because we make films with friends. Independent filmmaking is made with friends and family and love and all of that, which is great. But my advice generally is, even if you're making it with your best friend, please have an agreement. Because you don't want your relationship to go south. And things can go south because a film has a very, very, very long journey, right? So we'll start with story, script, screenplay. Again, no-brainer, please get it registered if you've written it. It seems obvious, but you would be surprised at the number of times I've seen people not do that. And I'm just astounded because the process is really simple, but having it registered is super important because that's really a foundation of the film, right? And while it may be that you're a writer come film director, what do you do if you're a producer who's sort of got somebody to write for you, you're a director who's gotten someone to write for you? What is a good agreement for a writer, right? And Unfortunately, although the Copyright Act in our country gives a lot of rights to writers, specifically for writers, because lyricist writers have sort of negotiated this power for them, most agreements for writers tend to take away these rights. And that's also because of the sort of production market we're in, because ultimately if the producer, director has to sell the film, they need to have all of the underlying rights. So most writer agreements, whether it's for the story, the script, or the screenplay, tend to take those rights. But know that royalty is something that is still within the purview of the rights of a writer. Unfortunately, we don't have a mechanism in place for that yet. But if it is possible for writing agreements to sort of say statutory royalty cannot be waived, I don't know if in 5 years we'll have a mechanism for it, 10 years, but whenever you do, maybe that's something that you can get. But I also wanted to sort of plug here the SWA sort of basic minimum contract. They have a basic minimum contract in place. They've circulated this draft. If you don't have access, maybe you can reach out to me. I can sort of share that. It's a document that's come about after a lot of conversations with different kinds of writers, like TV writers, film writers, writers for OTT platforms. But it's been a conversation that's been happening for a very long time. And they've been sort of able to come to a basic minimum agreement about things like credit, things like payment, all of which is important. Why is this important? You may have 3 writers. How do you decide credit then? You may have somebody who's written the story, somebody who's written the script, somebody who's written the dialogues. How do you decide who gets the credit? And I would say these are things that you should try and sort of put onto paper at the very beginning, because you don't want to reach the end of your film and then have a whole conversation and a fight about who gets credit for what, and therefore who gets payment for what. And of course, I mean, we all understand that credit is extremely important to safeguard for all of us in this industry, right? So I just wanted to plug that the SWA has a basic model contract, and maybe that's something that you could take a look at for certain clauses that you may want in your agreements. The other thing, again, no-brainer, but something that I've encountered a lot. People start working on a movie, it's based on a book, it's based on somebody's life, they don't have the rights to it. And you assume that you'll make such a great movie, you'll show the cut to the person, they're going to love it, and they're going to say, hey, please take the rights. Doesn't happen later. And you've mounted your entire project, but you don't have the rights. That means you're not going to find buyers. Producers are not going to take it if they don't see that chain of title. They want to see where the rights are coming from, right? So again, these are things that are easier to negotiate and best to negotiate at the very beginning. Because you also want to take, say, the person's, if it's based on a person's life, you want that person to be involved from the get-go, so that not just about copyright, right? Like there could be conversations about ethical dilemmas later on that they may bring up, and how are you projecting them? So if you have them in confidence early on, you have it on paper that this is a conversation you've had, this is not out of the blue that they're sort of, encountering for the first time. It saves you a lot of trouble subsequently, even if they back out. Many times they may back out, but you have something on paper to say, hey, at this point in time, this was the arrangement that we had. Again, another no-brainer. Please get an NDA signed. Anytime, every time you send your script forward. I see this as common practice with a lot of people. But again, there are very good model NDA agreements that you'll find online. But again, important to have both from the perspective of writers and producers. Producers generally ask for an NDA themselves when they're getting scripts, because they don't want, somebody tomorrow to say, hey, that film is based on the script that I had sent to you 2 years ago. But again, just healthy practice, have an NDA, have a format, make sure you use this wherever you're sending, because initially when you're trying to look for funding, you're going to try and send your script to as many people as you can. Having an NDA is good practice, right? And this brings us to funding, financing. I'm just looking at 4 things. Of course, there are many other models. I'm just looking at these in terms of decreasing level of control for a filmmaker, right? So if it's crowdsourced, you have a lot of control, because nobody is telling you, hey, this is how I want your film to be, this is how I want the film to be made. But most people don't really make a film on this model. You may be looking for grants. This could be co-production agreements. It could be grant by small independent grants in India that are really actually putting in a lot of small monies in different kinds of formats of films these days. They have their own agreements. They have their own requirements. But that's again, something that we look at a little bit more closely. Investors, some investors don't have really a say in creatives. Many of them may want to. How do you negotiate that? And finally, studios. I wish I had an answer to say how you negotiate with studios to get great deals. You may not be able to with a lot of things like IP rights, but there's a whole separate session tomorrow on IP rights. I'm not going to get into that. But I do feel that apart from intellectual property rights, there are other things that you can and should look out for in your contracts, even with studios, right? So what I want to talk about is a little bit of the essentials that you can look out for as a filmmaker when you're getting into an agreement with any of the different kinds of funding models, right? And some of these may apply to some may not apply to others, but things that I feel in my practice I've seen people struggle with, and therefore maybe things you would want to look out for. Most important thing, you've figured out how to mount your film, you figured out somebody who's giving you money. Do you retain control as a filmmaker? How much control do you retain, right? If it's with a studio, they're possibly going to say none at all. You don't get to decide who your actors will be, you don't get to decide the length of your film, you're not going to decide how you make your film. But again, I've seen that a lot of times people tend to be so grateful to studios for even investing in them that they're okay to sign off anything. And I would say you still have some bargaining power. And I know the language is complicated. There's a lot of heretofore, never before, here and above, things that people do not use. But in the middle of all of that language is actually a lot of commonsensical things. And at the end of the day, it is an agreement. Two people have to agree on certain things. They will take away copyright if they are a studio. But can you retain some amount of creative control? What could you retain? Can you use language that says that the director and the producer will reach a consensus, right? It could be a simple word like consensus, but that can go some way in ensuring that you have some control over things like how do you shoot and manage every day, right? And they may even carve out exceptions and say, no, we'll decide who the actors will be. We'll decide the length of the film. Okay, maybe those are battles you already knew you had to give up, and maybe the studio is even going to get you those actors that you want. But if you can retain control over the rest of it, where they won't come and interfere with your every shot and your every take, and you get to do it with as little interference as possible, get that in your contract, right? I don't know how much leeway you would have with decisions on the production, but I wanted to say it all the same because, and this will come back to when there's a buyback clause, how much money goes into production if it is not in the hands of the filmmaker can be an astronomical figure. And if you want to take the project out of the studio at some point, go to a better studio, or it's not working out, that figure has to be something you can match, right? More on that a little later. But control on production may not be that possible with a studio. But if it's an investor, right? Investors don't particularly come from the film space. They don't even understand what production is, right? What they want to do is to give money and make sure they get that money back in the best way possible. While again, knowing fully well that they're investing in money, they may not see that money. They know the risks involved, but they're still investing. Can you retain control both on your creative, directorial aspect and in terms of the decisions in production, right? Because they may want to know marketing, they may want to know distribution, they may want to know how your money is coming. But if you tell them, I will control the budget, but beyond that, which head gets what is up to me, I think those are things that you should sort of weave into your agreement, because then that gives you the freedom to decide where you want to spend that money, how you want to spend that money, because you know best, right? You know where you want that money. So again, just to say, different kinds of monies coming in, you have different ways in which you can keep this control, even with co-productions, grants. This is a constant fight. But just remember consensus. That's a good word to use in agreements where you feel that you want to have some say, if not the final say, right? Next thing is about rights and the distribution of rights. Again, like I said, I don't want to get into IP so much because there's a separate conversation on that. But if it's with investors, I just wanted to flag this thing because that is the model a lot of people might be adopting, having multiple investors. it's really important that you have your contracts and understanding in place at the get-go with every investor. Because you may be onboarding investors at different stages of your film, right? You need the money to sort of get the script rights. You find one investor. You carve out a piece of the pie, you give it to them. How much do you carve out? You need to know that you have to have enough of the pie left so that you can mount the rest of the film, and have some left because you may want to finish your film, right? So a model that I have seen that works for a lot of people is the investor puts X amount of money, they get half of that percentage of the rights in the film. So for instance, if the budget is 5 crores, the person invests 1 crore, 1 crore is 20%. They don't get 20% of the rights in the film, they get 10%. Plus, they get the investment back. It's not something investors are not open to. They understand where this is coming from. They also want to see the film complete. They may want to say that, no, I've given so much money, I want to have that much stake in the film, but they're not able to give you those full 5 crores. And you need to be able to raise those 5 crores. And you can only do that if you have some amount of the pie left to give at different stages until even your post-production, right? Because you don't know how much you're going to have to spend during post. But just to say, having this clarity on the percentage while you're sort of guaranteeing the investor that this percentage is not going to be further diluted. That's what they want to know. They want to know that that 10% is not tomorrow going to become 6% because you have to promise somebody else some more money, some more rights because you want more money. You protect that 10%. But don't give that 20% early on if you can avoid it, so that you have enough elbow room to finish your film and raise more money. Payment tranches. Again, this depends whether it's a studio film, investor, grant even. Like a lot of grants don't give you the whole amount of the money at the get-go. They give it to you in tranches. What are the tranches in which you can get or should be asking for money? Negotiate that. I think that's one of the spaces where the other side is open to negotiation, because you're not asking for rights. You're not asking for say. You're asking for, at what stage am I going to get the money, right? And different films have different needs. Maybe your film needs a lot of money at the time that you're shooting because it takes that level of money to get your equipment, get your cast, get your crew, everything. And your crew is not okay with deferred payment. Obviously, a lot of people are not going to work that way. You need your money at that stage. So make sure you get your tranches in such a way that it's top heavy. That's something you can negotiate. Of course, they're not going to give you all of the money. They're going to keep some of the money for, delivery of cut, or they're going to give only after the final output. Final output, I would say, try to keep it as minimal as possible, because you need the money for your post-production as well. If your film, on the other hand, is going to be post-production heavy, can you sort of negotiate your tranches in such a way that you are also going to be responsible with the money? So you have this money for your shoot, but you want to make sure you have enough left for your post, right? So I would say top heavy is the best thing. So you have most of the money to make your film, and if, God forbid, that grant somehow falls through or something happens, the gap that you need to arrange for later is not that much. But if you feel you need money more for post-production, and there's an escrow account that somebody is going to sort of protect that money, do it that way. But this is something I think that works for both producers and directors to be able to negotiate what the tranches of payment can be. Delivery timelines. And one very famous phrase that everybody is now, I'm sure, aware of, force majeure, an act of God. What is it really, right? And COVID taught us what it really meant. COVID is an act of God. Nobody saw it coming, and it had a lot of consequences. But why is it important to have this kind of a clause? Why is it important for you to keep some elbow room for your delivery timeline as much as you possibly can, or even for personal incapacity, right? Because you want to have some space for you to be able to say, okay, I have planned, I have scheduled, I have done the best I can, but in filmmaking, you know better than me, there are going to be 100 variables. And you may commit to saying this is the timeline for which I give my money, because producers want that, investors want that, everybody wants that date because they want to match their financial year and audit and all of that. But you need to make sure that you have enough space there for things that you genuinely feel are contingencies. And this can happen if you're shooting where there's going to be a landslide because you're shooting a landslide, or you're shooting somewhere in the monsoons, you're waiting for the monsoons, you have no control on that, right? But how can you sort of weave that into your agreement in such a way that you get a reasonable period of time? You're not going to say this is going to go on forever, but can you get 2 months of time because of things that are out of your control? Can you get the other side to sort of agree to say, okay, we're not going to breathe down your necks if X, Y, Z are the things that are sort of delaying the project, right? Again, something that can be negotiated because producers understand what force majeure is. They themselves are insured against that many times. That's one space. The other space is personal incapacity. Most like standard contracts with studios do have it, but if they don't, do insist on it. What does it mean if you fall sick? You're the director, you've fallen sick, you don't want to be replaced, right? But it's not like you're incapacitated forever. You've just broken a leg, you're not going to be able to shoot today, you're not going to be able to shoot for the next month, but you'll be fine the second month from then. How do you make sure that that is sort of protected so that you are not so easily dispensable from the film? And this would apply even to technicians, I would say. Again, all of these things can and should be reasonable. You're not going to say, you know, for 1 year or 6 months or whatever. But what is a reasonable period of time that you can negotiate and the other side will be open to understanding, because these are very basic fair right principles, right? Okay, the next one is about clarity about recovery of investment. This again would obviously apply to investors who come into films, not so much, say, a studio or other things. Why do I say clarity of investment early on? Say you've got 5 investors. They've come in different periods of time, and your agreements have happened at different points of time. How do you treat them? Do you treat them all equally because they've each given, say, the equal amount of money? Or you treat the person who gave you the money first most important because they got your project going? Or do you treat the last one because they got your project complete? I'm not saying there is a magic answer to this. It would depend really on every investor, every sort of relationship that you have. But again, something to be really clear about from the get-go. The moment the film starts making money, is it going to be something that you share in terms of equal contribution to everybody? Is it going to be in the proportion of how much they've invested? Or is it going to be that you make your deferred payments to your technicians first and then you pay out your investors, right? So again, all of this is very logical, but I've seen a lot of films being made with lots of different investors coming in and absolutely no clarity at the end of the day about how the money is going to be recovered. And then you're going to have fights. Then investors are going to say, I want all of my money right now, because you've not negotiated a situation where they're not going to get all of their money at the first go, but they're going to get it in the proportion that they've put in. Okay, I'm sorry if this is like, you know, going all over the place, but just these are the things that I sort of feel are different requirements and different kinds of agreements, yeah? Okay, next is about marketing, distribution. Do you get to have a say in that? Studio agreements wouldn't let you do it. Investors may say they want to be a part of it. Co-production agreements may allow you to do it. And that's, again, it depends on who the grantor is, etc. But again, consensus. If it's not possible for you to determine the marketing strategy, and maybe you yourself don't think you're very good at it, right? But you want to know, because you want to maybe know which festival you want to apply to first before some deal is cracked, right? Or you may have a certain area in mind that you think is going to be a better deal, or you think you're going to find somebody else who can help you market, if it's with investors, right? Like you're trying to find different kinds of, you know, markets for you to go to, different streams that you can sort of exploit. So if you are involved in that process, obviously you're going to take more ownership. It's your film as a director. You're going to have more interest in also making money. No filmmaker is going to say they don't want to make money. So if you can, I would say, have a role in marketing and distribution, even if it is just to know, right? You don't have to give it all up and say, hey, I've signed this out to the producer, they're going to handle it. They're handling multiple films. You will have your one film. So, the level of love and care and interest that you may have, I'm not saying all producers would do that. I'm just saying that being part of that conversation, I think will benefit both sides because everybody has the best interest of the film on their minds, right? Termination. again. Termination buyback. I feel this is something that we should all really, if there's one takeaway, please take this away from here. Termination can be mutual. Almost every agreement that comes to me has a one-sided termination clause. It's only the producer, only the investor, only the grantor. They're the only ones who have the right to terminate and walk away. And they walk away with saying whatever film has been made that far belongs to them. The story remains with them. The money that has been paid to you has to be returned. They're ridiculous. Most of them are ridiculous. And I get that they're doing that because, you know, they have their market interests in mind. But termination clauses in a fair contract have to be mutual. If the filmmaker is not okay, they must have a way of saying, I don't want to continue this arrangement. We'll figure what the best way out can be. But it has to be there, right? If you're not happy with the way you're being allowed to make your film, more importantly, if they've agreed to do XYZ things and they're not doing those XYZ things, why should you not have a right to walk out? Why is it that only the producer would have the right to terminate, right? So please, I mean, it could be a simple thing to say, your promises have not been maintained, therefore I'm terminating, but I need to have this right. Most of you may not exercise it, but it's important to have it because when there is the situation of conflict, it is a bargaining chip in you, with you, and you should be able to exercise it in the worst case situation. And if you feel that it's a story that's something, it's a story you worked on for a very, very long time, it is something that you're going to do whatever it takes to make into a film, put in a buyback clause. You could be a filmmaker writer, you could be a writer. What is a buyback clause? You've sold your money to the studio and your rights because they're going to put the money to make the film. Film is not being made because of whatever reason. They don't like your script today, they have 5 other things on their slate, whatever may be the reason, they don't want to make it. They're happy to get the money back, right? They're not always going to say, hey, you know, we'll keep the script regardless. No, they're happy to get the money back. But what are buyback clauses typically like, even if they have been negotiated? They typically say that it'll be the money that was paid to the writer or the filmmaker, whoever it was that the rights were bought from, plus all of the money that's been invested in the pre-production. And this is why I said having a say in production is important. Because maybe your film is set in Gurgaon, but they have gone to Switzerland to do a recce. And this has happened. I'm not just making this up. These kind of things happen. They go on recce because they're a big studio and this is where they do recce. They do recce in countries abroad. They take 5 people, that does not include you, and they have spent money. How do you have a say on the money that has gone into that? And how can you put that money to buy back that agreement? You can't, right? So if you do have a buyback clause which you feel you want to keep, can it be reasonable? And of course, it may not be limited to the script, purchase option rights or whatever money that was spent. It may be a little more, but can you control it in such a way that it is not this astronomical number that makes no sense, that you would never have put in had it been in your own hands, right? So termination, buyback if possible, but termination, please make it mutual. It always really helps. And it's also a way of saying it is an agreement between 2 parties. It is not one person who has complete, absolute autonomy over the other. Clarity on credits. Again, this is something that I feel, oh, sorry, I've gone to, sorry, my bad. The last one is, again, a term that you would have all seen, in indemnity clause. Again, tends to be one-sided. What is an indemnity clause? It is basically to say that if you do something that is violative of the law, or some third party says you've, infringed on their copyrights, you're protecting the other side from any of those claims. Fair enough. It's fair as long as it's true that it's because of your breach that there is going to be this third party claim. But if it's not your fault, then what? Who takes responsibility? And why should that responsibility be only yours as a filmmaker when the producer is going to have a say in the profit? There should be an equal sort of contribution towards the potential loss. And we all know today we live in a time where all kinds of third-party claims can be made, right? Somebody's morality is hurt, somebody's sentiment is hurt. That may not be the intention of the producer or the filmmaker, right? If it's an infringement of copyright, which you know you were doing, as a filmmaker, too bad. Own up, take responsibility, and that's a fair clause. But if it is not because of your mistake, but there is a third-party claim. Having an indemnity clause that is mutual, or to say that we will come together to sort of decide on the legal strategy and think about the legal fees together. If you can negotiate it, please negotiate it. Because these are things that, again, it may seem extremely remote or impossible, but the moment there is a problem, your film is going to be dropped like hot potatoes, and then you have to, figure out the rest of the strategy for the film. And the other thing that comes generally with an indemnity clause is, the limitation of liability, which is to say, if at all there is any loss that is suffered as a consequence of breaching any of the terms of the agreement, how much can the other side get as a loss? So, say for instance, this is generally above and beyond the value of the film, because there are all of these extra losses that are calculated, right? So it's always a good idea to limit that liability to the actual amount that they have invested in you or in the film. It cannot be anything and everything. And by this I mean, lawyers are very good at adding words to say there was a consequential damage caused because this film did not come, and therefore the second film could not come out, and that second film's profit would have been X amount of money, and because of that, the whole series of films was stopped. So all of these things could be added. I'm not saying it happens. I'm just saying there is always a potential. So limitation of liability, again, is something that is legally recognized in most contracts, limited to an extent that is the value of this particular project. It helps both sides. For the other side, for the producer as well, it is to limit it to the extent that they have a responsibility of payment. Because even writers and filmmakers can sue a producer and say, hey, they did this and that and that and this. So in order to ensure both sides are going to respect the fact that this X amount was the money that was the value agreed between the two as an exchange, and that is the only amount they'll get in case either side breaches anything. So that's the limitation of liability. Again, make it mutual. Just to say indemnity, termination, limitation of liability, words that you'll come across, see if you can negotiate it such a way that they're mutual terms. Again, this is by no means a comprehensive conversation about the different things that you need to look out for when there is funding, but these are the things that I have seen typically happen in independent films, and thought it was important to discuss. The next thing that I want to talk about are crew contracts. Again, I don't see this to be normal practice with independent filmmaking, and I feel it's important. And I feel it's important both for the filmmaker and for the crew themselves. Again, just to say, because you're making films with friends doesn't mean that things will be the same forever. It's always good to have these things in writing. What are the basic things, right? What is the scope of work? Because if it's a small crew, a person is going to be doing 10 different things that may not be part of the designation of that role of the person in common sense, right? They could be doing 2 different other things. But if you're expecting them to do it, make sure their agreement says so. And if you are signing it as a technician, make sure you know what you're signing up for, because that then sort of helps you understand how much you should be sort of negotiating in terms of payment, even if it is small. It has to be proportionate to what you're putting in. So scope of work, very important to define. Second thing that's really important is the term of work. And by the term of work, term in law and these kind of contracts is generally the period, right? What is the period for which you're signing up a person? And again, you may not know your outer date, but always good to have some sense of it to say, if all things are considered, this is the date by which we assume it will happen. If you cannot make that promise, what are the things you can do, right? And what are the things as technicians you can ask for? Make it first priority and not an exclusive contract. Again, these are things that may seem really simple and logical, but I have seen people not do this.
What is the distinction between exclusive and first priority?
Yeah, so an exclusive contract is if I sign with you and I say I'm going to be your art director, and I say I'm going to be exclusively your art director, it means I can take up no other project. For, say, you sign me up for 1 year because you feel your film is going to take 1 year. But unfortunately, your film now goes into the 2nd year. I have agreed to be exclusive. I can't take up another project next year, even though I am waiting and you are not going to pay me extra money, right? So first priority is to basically say that if I get another project, I will make sure that I don't do anything to hurt your timelines. I'll make the best efforts to be available, but that doesn't preclude me from taking other work. It may not be another film, it could be an ad that I may want 2 to 3 days off for because I need to make my money too, right, as a technician. But as a technician, I would say this is something that you can ask for if the period of time for the film is long. Again, there will always be exceptions. If you're a cinematographer, you cannot say I won't be there exclusively for the days of the shoot. You have to be there. But what can you do for pre-production, post-production, for coloring? Can you say that in that period of time, I will be there on a first priority basis, not exclusive, because I'm doing other projects. And most filmmakers would understand this, right? That's their way of sort of balancing out the fact that that outer timeline may not be clear for them because of whatever reasons. Fee payments, very important. Again, tranches. If you're a technician and you're signing up with a studio, your tranches have to be top heavy if you can negotiate that. I've seen a lot of contracts in which there's like 20%, 30% payment for when the film is released. You don't know if the film is going to release even. There are many films that are just waiting to be released, right? Do not make it contingent on things that are not in your hand. Make it contingent on your deliverables. The last output you give, that typically should be the last tranche of payment that should come to you. But if they insist that no, we need to keep some amount for the last stage, keep it to as minimum a percentage as possible. Peg it to things that require you to actually get money for that period of time. Is it something that you need after the end of the first schedule? Is it something you need on a more regular basis, right? So if I'm an AD or I'm being an EP, I may want a monthly payment negotiated. I may not want to peg it to stages of the film, right? And this works for the directors as well, the producers as well, because it's going to be payment for the kind and the nature of work that you do. So each technician has different demands. So I would say keep your tranches in a way that makes sense for you logically in terms of the payment. And always say money plus GST. Please exclude GST from your payment if that is at all applicable. GST is something that the producer or the director would have to, the producer would have to bear. Otherwise, it gets lumped into what you are earning. Of course, TDS exists. It's a really small point. But the number of times I've had to add plus GST, I'm just like, it has to be standardized, right? Please make sure that you get paid in full to the extent that you have been promised. Deferred payments, again, I'm sure a lot of you know about this. A lot of technicians may agree to getting some amount of money during the duration of the film. If the film does well and the film starts earning money, then they take a payment, which is your deferred payment. I'm not advising this, but I'm saying if there is such a term in your agreement, please be sure you understand. If it says deferred payment 15 lakhs, doesn't mean you'll get those 15 lakhs. It means that if the film makes money and all the investors are paid out, and then there's some profit then, which you may not see. So that's just something to sort of look out for. Securing rights, this is something that I wanted to put in for directors and producers. Now, typically we assume rights are with the writers, with musicians, but performers also have rights, and art directors also have rights, and all kinds of people have rights, especially if you're negotiating with, people in Netflix or abroad or whatever. They may want to see all the rights and titles to the film and the underlying rights. So in the agreements that you have with technicians, do add clauses that say that all rights have been given to you unless it's been negotiated otherwise, which is typically not the case. But important to have it so that when you're asked to show your chain of titles, you are showing not just the chain of title for your script and your screenplay, etc., but from all of the different stakeholders, so that the producer becomes that one person point of contact who can then make these deals with Netflix or whoever it is. Termination clause for technicians. This is for technicians again. Good practice is to make it mutual. Good practice is also to have a clause about the consequence. So I have shot 2/3 of a film, say what happens to the 1/3 if I choose to, leave the project, or there is termination from the other side. Am I ensured of my pro rata payment? It may seem like a no-brainer, but you would be surprised at the number of times there is no consequence to termination. Sometimes it even goes so far as to say monies will be paid back. any clause that says money will be paid back, please, if you can, please scratch that out. There should be no obligation of repayment of money unless you have gotten, say, there's a tranche that is contingent upon you doing something and that stage hasn't been reached, then that's a fair ask. You've not delivered to that stage and there's been a termination. But if you have, and you have monies that are pending, make sure pro rata you get that payment. Again, pro rata could be different. If it is contingent on the stages, then before you start your project, decide what that pro rata would be. Would it be on a daily basis? Would it be on the portion of the work completed? But important to have. Again, not because you may not want to continue with the film. You may just end up getting another project. And this project is sort of extending in time. What do you do? Right? So always good to have that clarity on credits. Again, especially when there are multiple people, good to be clear beforehand. If you shoot 2/3, you get main credit. You shoot 1/3, you don't. Conversations like that. Tough conversations, better had early on, not later. Representations and warranties, again, a phrase that you'll come across. What does it really mean? These are the promises parties are making to each other. They're saying that, we'll abide by the law, we'll make sure that we complete within time. And off late, you'll see a lot of this also says sexual harassment policy will be managed and will be followed. If you can, not if you can, but I would advise very strongly, please ensure you do have a sexual harassment policy for your production. Any space that has 10 plus people should have it, always good to have. But representations and warranties also say that if there is a situation of a sexual harassment or any other law being broken, what is the consequence, right? And a lot of times, now after the Me Too movement, we've seen films being dropped just because, not just because, wrong choice of word, when there is an allegation. But how do you protect the film? Producers want to protect the film, artists want to protect the film, and you want consequences on the person against whom this allegation has been made. Having a policy ensures that you're addressing that, and you may also choose to do things like not give that person credit. But does it mean you'll go so far as to say that person will not be paid? Depends. If you had a policy would have appropriate punishments for appropriate, the nature of the offense, because there could be a gradation of things. So having a policy ensures that you have a response to the situation, and you also know what the consequence of such a case coming up on anybody in your team could be. But that's just one example, just to say representations and warranties should also be mutual. The producer, the studio, whoever should also be promising you that they will follow the law and that they will keep up their end of the promise. And it's not something that is just unilateral. I'm going to skip this. This is just rights clearance, get all the clearances, so you don't get a notice from Saregama saying, hey, for 10 seconds on that TV at the background, somebody was playing this song. If you know these things are there, just change it. If you know the artist, because it's a smaller kind of composition of an artist that you can reach out to them. But get all your clearances. Again, these are things that are necessary when you may get into distribution deals. And this is the last bit that I want to talk about. What are the things to look out for in distribution? Now, if you have a distributor or an agent who's doing it for you, maybe that's somebody who's going to take care of it for you. But even in your process of choosing who it should be, or if you yourself are entering into a distribution agreement, whether it is license, sale, etc., what are the things you can look out for, right? What's the territory? My favorite word in all these contracts is the universe, because they seem to say the universe. Yeah, the universe is the territory. You'll see in a lot of agreements. What does it mean? Like, what is the extent to which this agreement extends? And because Elon Musk is now going into space, the universe is actually, oh, no, it's really a territory. If it says world, it's the world. If it says universe, who knows, tomorrow your film could be up there. But territory is important because a lot of co-production agreements, say for instance, will say, this territory is for this particular producer. This territory is for that particular producer. You can have multiple distribution deals on the same thing, right? The same one film, you can have different territories. Make sure you know which territory it's for, and you explore as many territories you can. If your co-production agreement forbids you from doing it, make sure you know that too, so that there is no confusion later on. But territory, important. Term, if it's a license, how long is it for? And in those 10 years, say for instance, the term is for 10 years, what happens to the deals that are cracked for perpetuity in those 10 years? Who gets to keep the rights after that 10th year? right? I'm not saying again that there is a right or wrong answer, but something to look out for and a conversation to be had. Okay, another phrase that you'll come across, modes, mediums, and formats, and a lot of you may have even seen one long page which will have, these are the modes, mediums, and formats, and it'll have HDTV and this and the rest and this and whatever, now known or to ever be discovered. What does it really mean, right? It's the different ways in which your film can show. It could be a satellite, it could be on OTT, it could be a film being screened, whatever it is. Can you carve it up? Some distributors may be able to do it only for films in, TV. Some may be able to do it in an OTT platform. Or you may want to do it. You may want to explore it on your own. Can you carve it up in such a way that you're able to exploit, that it sounds like a wrong word, but that's really the word. Can you exploit your film in the most efficient way and potentially, maximize all the different avenues that you have? Another thing, small thing, but I think very significant is, do you get to say and do you get to see the monies that are being spent? A lot of times you will not see money coming to you even though you've cracked great deals, because there will be all of these costs for promotion and advertisement, P&A, subtitling costs, and delivery of materials in format this and that and the rest. They may all be legitimate, but I would say if you have the ability to have a say in it, please do, because this can really eat up into the money that is earned by the film and you may not see it, right? So, like for instance, there's an agreement in which the territory is for India, but they've got subtitling rights for every language in the world, and I don't see the purpose, because obviously they're only going to subtitle it, if at all, in Indian languages. But they may saddle my client tomorrow with all of those expenses for subtitling in German, which they can't even exploit, right? And I'm not saying it will happen, but these are things to sort of look out for. Access to books of accounts, I think this is a very, very fair ask. They are distributing your film. They're going to give you money maybe on an annual basis, quarterly basis, whatever that may be, but you should have the right to inspect their books of accounts. So you know exactly where the money is coming in, where the expenses are, and that's a check on them. And it's a thing that you can ask for. It's recognized, people allow it, but please do ask for it, because that enables you to also understand, is this territory doing well? If it's a license, it's not doing well. 5 years are up, where do I go next? Or if it's doing really well, what else can I do in this territory, right? Just having knowledge about that. Editing rights, I mean, again, I just put this because I just thought it's important, but in your distribution agreements, they sometimes keep editing rights because they may want to remove certain things for certain territories. That's reasonable, but see if you can always have a say in that, because you would want your version to be there. If it's difficult, say I understand in some countries getting a censor certificate may be a really quick process, you may not have the time to have a say in it, but if you can have a say in it, you should have a say in it. In the editing, keep it limited to editing only for technical specifications so that they don't interfere in the content. And yeah, finally, keep the right to screen your film if you can. It's still your film. They don't really dissuade you from doing it, but always good to have that clear. Yeah, that was my speed conversation.
I think this was fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you.